right, team, come on up. So I think we have the toughest spot being after lunch, digesting your food, and I hope we don't put you to sleep. So I'm Geri Stengel, and I'm delighted to be moderating this very important topic on new ways of, or emerging ecosystem fund. Now I think I'm tired. So funding an emerging ecosystem of options. So founders need to know about these new options, and very importantly, they can find out about them through different accelerator programs, which is where you all come into play. So we have a great group of panelists. LJ Erwin from Google Cloud, and he's going to talk about corporate and venture capital and how it's evolving over time and supporting more of the early stage founders. Jed Halfon from Republic, and he's going to talk about regulation crowdfunding and maybe even mix in some cryptocurrency. Carolyn Tuch, who will talk about blockchain and the future of funding using tokens. And Beth McKeon, who will be talking about funding options for just startups that are elsewhere, that are unlikely startups is the way that you put it, right? Terrific, terrific. So the format is going to be, I'm going to ask a handful of questions of the panelists, and then I'm going to open up the questions to the floor. So LJ, if you can get us started, you have an interesting, well, actually, even before we get into the questions, can each of you introduce yourself and give us a little background on yourself? So LJ?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is LJ. I work at Google Cloud for startups. I lead the West Coast, ensuring early stage startups have access to resources to build on top of Google Cloud, so they can build with speed, with reliability, and economically. Before leading the team on the West Coast, I was at a small firm called Andreessen Horowitz, and I led sourcing for early stage startups, pre-seed, seed startups at A16Z for 3 years. For half that time, I did it across all of our general partners, across consumer, enterprise, crypto, and healthcare. And then at the later stage, I was doing more healthcare, business SaaS. So I'm very familiar with engaging with accelerators, angel investors, pre-seed, seed investors, and then also navigating the space between helping out startups, keeping startups warm, and more importantly, sourcing. Because I had to help our general partners source 1,000 startups very quickly, and they all have different, criteria of what they wanted to see.
Terrific, very cool, very cool. Jed, tell us a little bit about your background in Republic.
Sure, so my name is Jed. I'm a partner and associate general counsel at Republic, and Republic is a end-to-end investment platform that lets everyday people invest as low as $10 into startups. We're one of the first companies to come out of the Jobs Act. I'm a corporate lawyer by trade, spent a few years in a white shoe firm over here in Midtown, got the crypto bug, and have now spent the last year and a half at Republic trying to find creative ways to get equity and tokens into the hands of everyday people.
Terrific. Beth, tell us about unlikely startups.
Maybe it's unlikely places for startups.
Okay.
So Beth McKeon with Fluent, and I, at this point, have run 10 accelerator cohorts in 5 states, and often in places that we don't think of as being big startup hubs, like Birmingham, Alabama, rural Colorado, and eastern Iowa. And my company is hired to bring accelerators and founder training and support to these communities, because what we've seen is that, obviously there's interesting startup activity happening on the coasts and in the really big cities, but if you've got an internet connection, you can build a startup anywhere. And those startups need help too in order to be really globally competitive. And that's the work that Fluent does, is bringing those resources to those communities.
Terrific. Carolyn?
Great. So my name is Caroline Talk, and I'm the program manager for the blockchain accelerator that Techstars runs here in New York. So if you've been here today, you've heard a couple of different people from Techstars speak, but my job is to run our blockchain-specific program. So we invest in 10 companies a year and spend the rest of the year sort of sourcing and supporting the rest of our portfolio. But have been excited to be the first blockchain-specific program that Techstars has run, and I think that the organization recognizes the importance of emerging tech and emerging different ways of funding these companies. So super excited to be here. Before I joined Techstars, I ran recruitment at Venture for America. So spent a lot of time thinking about what makes a great entrepreneur and how to find those people, and similarly working in secondary markets. So we have that in common.
Terrific. LJ, what do you see as sort of the more interesting trends going on in corporate America supporting entrepreneurs and helping to fund them?
Yeah, well, it's multifaceted. So there are incubation labs and corporate VCs who definitely want to play in that space and try to provide value to the ecosystem. And they normally do so by taking their platform and their resources and their distribution and their supply chain and all the things that most VCs or even companies can do, early stage companies can do, and use that as a way to like leverage value for the investments they make in their startups or their portfolio. However, I do think that like the next evolution of how corporations, or more importantly, even venture capitalists are going to start engaging with the ecosystem is similar to like a platform-driven approach. I feel like as more capital is introduced into the system, especially at the later stage, from untraditional investors like hedge funds and family offices and sovereign wealth funds, all these guys, capital is much more ubiquitous. It's a seller's market. And now that means that if you're an entrepreneur, you can go anywhere for capital. Like literally in the West Coast, you can like snap your fingers and that capital will instantaneously appear on the table.
So I'm not sure that founders would agree with that.
Oh, I do. I see it all the time. I was speaking from
so maybe
personal
San
experience.
Francisco. I'm not hearing this in New York.
Yeah, it's in the Bay. Yeah, but I mean, even
Yeah.
if you're a founder in New York, like it's easy to get into the. I say it's easy because I'm in that space, but it's a lot less difficult than most people think it is. And I say that because of my specific experience working at the firm at A16Z. Like Mark said all the time, like raising capital is going to be the easiest thing you do. Getting that engineer from Facebook or Google to leave their comfy, 3 meals a day, massages, play beach volleyball at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's tough, and you're not going to pay them as much. There's no GSUs. There's no, that's going to be the tough thing. But going back to your original question, like what am I seeing in terms of like how corporations are being more investing in the space, especially at the early stage. I think it's leveraging their resources beyond capital, because capital is now ubiquitous, leveraging their resources to provide value to startups.
Terrific. Okay, great. So, Jed, Republic has a very specific focus on helping women and minorities. Can you talk a little bit about why focus on women and minorities and why crowdfunding is the right kind of vehicle for women and minorities?
Sure thing. So while I agree with you that capital is ubiquitous, it's still not always getting into the hands of all the founders who need it, right? In New York and Silicon Valley, it's very easy. These cities are really these enclosed communities and really tight networks that women and founders of color have just not had access to. And I think it's around 12% that traditional Silicon Valley money going into women founders. Most diverse founders don't have that money to get them over the seed stage, that bootstrapping capital that you need to just put together a deck, a white paper, get you door to door, get you on a little road show. Most minority founders are women, and women founders don't have this access.
Right.
So crowdfunding is kind of one interesting solution to this problem, right? Crowdfunding is geographically neutral.
Yeah, if you can give a little background on what regulation crowdfunding is.
Sure. So traditional venture investment and private investment in early stage companies is limited to the wealthiest, to the 1%. Effectively, you have to be an accredited investor to invest. A couple of years ago, the Jobs Act was passed, which allowed basically anybody to invest up to as little as $2,000 in early stage companies. This opened the gates for everyday people to become investors, right? So Republic spun out of AngelList, which was effectively crowdfunding for wealthy people, and we kind of created a formula where everyday companies, regular companies, can go raise money from everyday people.
Terrific. And can you talk a little bit about the successes that women and minorities are having on whether it's all regulation crowdfunding platforms or more specifically your platform?
Yeah, so 40% of the founders on Republic have been women, which is just leaps and bounds ahead of what you see in the rest of the industry. We've had a lot of founders of color, especially on the crypto side. I think crowdfunding in general, it's grown slower as an industry than I think people thought it would. And so part of our job is just educating people, changing the stigma a little bit. There's usually a stigma attached to crowdfunding, which we think is entirely unwarranted, but letting people know that they can even do this, right? Half the time we're on the phone educating people and saying, no, you don't have to go to Silicon Valley. You can raise from your friends and family. You can make a pitch online. People have no idea. So that's a lot of the work we're trying to do.
So it's interesting that you bring up the stigma. So Jed wouldn't know this, but I did research about Regulation D crowdfunding. And the reason that I did it was I really thought that women would gravitate towards crowdfunding in an online environment, and they were not. And the reason was the stigma attached to crowdfunding. So if a lawyer or a professional recommends to women not to use a certain type of financing, they're going to take the professional's advice, where I think a man might be more likely not to take it and to go beyond that. So Beth, if you, oh, and actually even before I go on with Beth, Jed may not also know this, is the one kind of financing that women outperform men is on crowdfunding. And there are 3 reasons why. And do you want to take a guess at those 3 reasons? Or
One is definitely hustle, I would imagine. But I'll let you provide the other.
So women are great at marketing, and they know how to pull at the emotional heartstrings. Their community comes around them. And the third is that people think women are more trustworthy, so they're more likely to
These are all facts.
These are all facts. Thank you.
I knew all 3. I just
there's
wanted
a
to
lot
see
of
if you did the
academic research on this. So, Beth, if you can talk to us about serving entrepreneurs in unlikely communities, and what are the lessons learned that you are learning that can apply to everybody else in this room?
So I think where I always like to take founders first is like get the right kind of funding. So that, like, we have all these options, but founders don't always need equity fundraising, right? And that's just the story that they're being, like, that's the story that's being told over and over and over again. And so what I like to do is really kind of expand their thinking and look at, can you build this with revenue? Can you go to things like revenue-based investing as well, where you're, taking less of the equity off the table over time because you are building a profitable business. And I think someone in one of the panels earlier today was talking about, like, can we just provide enough funding so that they can build the business they want to build and not have to get on the venture roller coaster, right, where they're always having to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, the cool thing that I see, and I think this is true in lots of markets, is that founders in places that aren't just sort of driven by the narrative of the startup world tend to be driven because they're solving a real problem, and they're not as, like, focused on hitting the success that the big stories talk about. And so that gives us more options for thinking about what that funding can look like.
So I'm a researcher, so I do the state of women-owned businesses for American Express, and I read a lot of academic research. So one of the researchers that I follow a lot did some research among Inc. magazine, the Inc. 5000, and only 5% of even the fastest growing companies in the United States are raising equity financing. Talk a little bit about some of the kinds of financing that your entrepreneurs would be using.
A fair number of them are still going the venture route. So to be clear, like, you know, the high growth companies often do need that funding, and fortunately, even in smaller towns or less developed markets, that kind of funding is available when the companies are viable and growing at a fast pace. But I'm a big fan of an organization called Indie VC that is really starting to look at what are some of the other options that are available. So, you know, revenue-based investing is a piece of that. Grants are a huge opportunity for founders to take advantage of, like, funding that they don't actually have to give up anything for, right? So CDFIs are a piece of this. There are a lot of options, and I think we can serve our founders better when we lay all of those out and we don't just put them on a track and say, you have to do it this way to be successful.
Terrific. Carolyn, let's talk a little bit about probably the newest way of fundraising, which is blockchain and tokens. So give us the big macro view of blockchains and tokens.
So don't get into the details, is what you're saying.
Well, no, you can get a little.
It's fair. It can be complicated. So I think that just to give a bit of context, so the first sort of iteration of global equity crowdfunding were ICOs, so initial coin offerings. And those really boomed at the end of 2017 when the price of Bitcoin was extremely high and there was a lot of activity in blockchain technology. And I think that's also for many people in the industry has turned into, and very much out of the industry as well, has turned into sort of a synonym for scams. People associate a lot of ICOs with scams, and that's because they lacked essentially transparency in the compliance infrastructure that was necessary to sort of do those in a way that was both compliant and supported the companies and also the people that were investing. So at Techstars, we have looked sort of to the future and see STOs as very much the next iteration. So that stands for a security token offering. To give a bit of background, I won't give too much. Security tokens are essentially just a different way of representing ownership of an asset. So rather than sort of declaring ownership of those assets or securities via paper, which is what a lot of what happens now, it's done digitally on a blockchain. So with an STO, essentially you are opening the possibility for those securities to be offered in a way that's compliant. So right now, there's not much of a market or an infrastructure for those types of securities to be exchanged or bought. But in the future, STOs represent a scalable way for global equity crowdfunding to happen in a way that's compliant because the technology bakes in those compliance infrastructures to the digital security itself. So hopefully that made sense. But basically, the blockchain and tokens sort of offer a way for the technology to replace a lot of the transparency issues that we saw with ICOs and sort of the initial boom of fundraising via blockchain.
Okay, so I'm going to put LJ on the spot because he said that money is ubiquitous for founders, not so much for women and minorities. So how can accelerators help corporations and venture capitalists connect into women and minorities and getting funding?
Yeah. So let me be clear. Let me be clear. It's definitely not easy for anyone to raise capital.
Oh, good, thanks.
Although I said you can snap your fingers and money. That's magic. It's not easy to raise capital. It's very good. It's going to get a lot of no's. Everyone gets no's.
Yeah.
I think minorities may receive more no's than yeses, and that might be due to like the networks that they have naturally. But I feel that if at the end of the day, you need to be able to build something that's useful, that solves a problem, and you need to be able to sell what's useful and solves a problem. And if you're doing one of those two things, money will come to you, right? And money can come in, resources can come in multiple forms. It can come in actual capital, it can come in engineering, it can come in the form of Google Cloud credits. If you want some Google Cloud credits, I can help you out with that. But I think to answer your question about what accelerators can do to kind of nurture and be a ground where minorities can actually flourish and provide get access to venture capital, is that I think accelerator programs need to be more like angels, like super angels, and have a niche like what Techstars is doing with blockchain, as well as be very focused about who works well within their environments, right? And I think as accelerator programs become more specialized and they have different mentors and resources that cater to specific types of either people or areas or industries, that will help not only VCs understand, okay, these are the experts I need to align myself with, and also use these accelerators as signals to identify top talent. Because VCs just don't have a lot of time to be everywhere, the same place, and do all things. So even though VCs feel like they're omnipotent, they're not, right? So how can accelerator programs really be like that red hot center of talent, and for new companies that might be underneath the surface that VCs just don't see?
Terrific. Jed, regulation crowdfunding has gotten a bad rap because of sloppy cap tables. Can you talk about what a sloppy cap table looks like and why Republic has developed a solution for that?
Sure. So regulation crowdfunding has gotten a bad rap, and I'll be the first to tell you that we have been pushing for lots of big key changes in the process, whether it's accounting, reporting, other restrictions on secondary trading, what have you. The big talking point in the industry is always the cap table. Nobody wants to see a messy cap table. People and founders give out equity for all types of reasons and all types of amounts at varying valuations. It's not usually super top of mind when you're desperate or you're in a bind and you end up with a messy cap table, and you're in a situation where traditional VCs won't want to get involved because it looks too messy. The politics are there. You just walk away. So Republic, if you have a crowdfunding campaign, we kind of smush everybody into one line on the cap table. That's been really the key innovation we've done. We use an instrument called the CrowdSafe, which is just a crowdfunding friendly version of the Y Combinator Safe. But on top of that, what people care about on the cap table is also voting, right? It's control. And so if someone has an exit, or if the safe converts on Republic, you only get shadow shares. So it converts into non-voting shares. This keeps founders happy. This keeps potential investors happy down the line.
Terrific. Beth, talk to us about how entrepreneurs are making the decision, or how you help entrepreneurs make the decision as to which financing option is right for them.
So I think the traditional equity funding is great if you are going to be doing R&D for a long time, or you need to grow really fast to capture a market. Like there are cases where that can fuel growth in a startup. A lot of really great companies are being built across the US that can operate off of sales.
Right.
And so ultimately, like that's a pretty good delineation right there. Like, can you grow into the business you want to grow off of sales? Do it.
Right.
If you can't, because there's so much upfront cost that needs to be invested, then we have the tools for that too.
Terrific.
And just to quickly build on that, I think that in our experience, sort of the biggest barrier to entry for non-dilutive capital is simply awareness. A lot of young entrepreneurs or early stage entrepreneurs are, like you said, unaware of the potential grants or other kind of forms of financing. So I really believe that as accelerator staff, it is on us to not only be aware of those things ourselves, but to give founders those resources. And I think at Techstars, that's something that earlier on we were more focused on traditional financing. Many companies that come out of Techstars end up raising a, $3 to $5 million round. It's a classic pre-seed, seed, Series A trajectory. But now sort of we recognize the alternatives, and are part of what we do as accelerator teams is educate. And ultimately, you can't make the decision for the companies, but if you give them a sort of a menu of resources, they'll make the choice that's best for them.
So is,
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think it ultimately comes down to like building and selling. I know a team based out of Austin, which is not a traditional ecosystem.
it's now secondary.
It's
so
growing,
pretty
but
top
in
second.
it's not like Silicon Valley. It's not like New York. I know a team out of Austin went to my alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin. Little plug there, exactly. And they did their first funding through just winning hackathons.
Right.
They would win a hackathon in Austin. They would take that money, go to Silicon Valley, win like $50,000 here, go to Utah, win another $50,000. They won $250,000, $300,000, which is a seed round, and they just started building. And they didn't raise capital. And I think at the end of the day, and I think more startups are warming up to this idea, is like you don't have to go and get venture capital or seed funding. In fact, I think the new American dream is owning your own stuff.
Yeah.
Outright, like you're independently, like Master P back in the day. You sold your music out of the trunk as opposed to having like a major record label.
Yeah.
Like entrepreneurs are warming up to the idea they don't have to go to venture capital to build their company.
So I'm going to circle back. I'm sorry. Did I interrupt?
No, I was just going to say, and to your point, that's why a lot of the sort of more traditional VCs are now recognizing a need for a platform and for more holistic support. The capital is not enough because there are other ways to get it, and,
Right.
and people are sort of skewing away from, many entrepreneurs I think would disagree. Like if Andreessen is offering you 20
A lot of
million,
money.
you'll probably take it, but there are a lot of other options, and so traditional VCs have to add support services.
So I'm going to circle back in a second to blockchain, but since we were talking about grants, and I spoke to Beth and to Carolyn about this, how do you help your entrepreneurs find out about grants? So at the federal level, you can go to grants.gov and find out about SBIR and STTR. How else are you helping entrepreneurs find out about grants?
Yeah, I can speak to that in my program. So in our accelerator, we hire contract associates who are essentially portfolio support employees who are kind of outsourced team members for our portfolio companies that are moving through the accelerator. And towards the end, we typically assign one or two of them to provide investment support for our 10 companies. And part of their focus is not only to sort of do investor pipeline creation and helping with that, but also research on grants. So whether it's federal, state, local, now often, there's a trend of corporates shifting a lot of their CSR efforts towards entrepreneurship. So whether it's, the Rent the Runway 50K grant or Mary Claire, companies have sort of small pockets of money that, I say small, but 10K for an early stage company could be, lifebloods, another month of runway. So those are really important things to sort of help and focus the research efforts of our associates for our companies.
Terrific.
I'll also just add that in the blockchain ecosystem, there are just so many grants. I wish I were an engineer. There are no lawyer grants. I'm yet to see any. But there is so much money just being given away to ecosystem funds. And this is kind of a new kind of surface area for companies to raise money, right? It's kind of like a hackathon. You pitch some decentralized group of people, you tell them about your idea, how will this help support this network, and you can get money, 10, 20, 50, 100K. It's pretty amazing, and there is a ton of money out there because these companies raised a ton of money and they don't know how to deploy it, right? There's definitely a ubiquity of money in crypto, and especially at the protocol level, and these people are trying to find good founders, good engineers to build products that actually work.
Yeah, supporting context for that, 8 out of the 10 companies in my recent class received grants of that nature. So they're really everywhere.
They're really out there. So, Carolyn, what do you think the future of token-based financing is going to look like?
Yeah, I spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I definitely think STOs and essentially, it doesn't make sense for every company to digitize their assets right now. But in the future, we really believe that ultimately, a lot of companies will end up digitizing their securities, and tokens represent, to our point earlier of access, a way to increase access, and we need to figure out as an industry how to do that in a compliant way. So I would say STOs. So
I'm going to open up to questions in a moment, but I just want one follow-up question for Jed. Regulation crowdfunding needs a few fixes. What's in the works, and what do you think the future of regulation crowdfunding will look like?
So there are a lot of fixes that
Yeah.
are hopefully in the works. The biggest one that people think of as the big blocker is the cap. So right now you can only raise up to 1.07 million. I would probably choose a round number for the next one, hopefully 5, 10, 20. That sounds like the biggest obstacle, but it's really not. I think it's more on the regulatory front, on the ongoing disclosures. Like we can get in front of lots of really interesting companies and convince them that from a marketing perspective, from a community perspective, crowdfunding has a lot of value, depending on in various stages of the company. But when they have to kind of get in the weeds of ongoing reporting and other obligations, we kind of lose them at times. So I would say getting rid of ongoing reporting, raising the cap, changing the stigma, which is not regulatory, right? That's just an industry thing. I think, as Caroline was saying, the ICO boom did good things and bad things for crowdfunding. I think it did good things. I think it made people, it kind of wet everyone's beak a little, and it gave people venture returns in matters of days and weeks instead of years, for better or worse, but it got people interested in the idea. So really the cap and some regulatory fixes.
Terrific. So I'm going to open up for questions from the audience. So no questions from the audience.
We have one right here.
Thank you. My name is Sharon Wallet, and I work at Health Venture. We invest in digital healthcare companies. So I know the conversation in here a lot today has been about, accelerating companies and looking at what they're able to do in terms of, getting to that next stage. So I'm interested in learning a little bit more when we're talking about this topic about emerging ecosystems and new options and funding, what any of you and your organizations are doing in kind of like marginalized communities, whether it's, in New York, it's like the Bronx, like there's not a lot of innovation that's going on in there. Or when you're talking about, women getting access to funding and getting access to these different types of resources to help you get from one stage to the next. And then just the barriers that are there, because sometimes accelerator programs are really created for a specific type of corporate company, but there's a lot of founders or a lot of entrepreneurs who have good ideas but are not able to get to that point where they are a good fit for an accelerator program.
Yeah, I can speak from Google's perspective. I mean, there's a number of initiatives that we're doing across the board to help individuals in marginalized communities or untraditional communities access technology. And we have a huge focus on the next billion users, providing access to Android and devices so they can learn how to either program or get access to information that normally would not be there. We are laying down Wi-Fi networks and doing a whole host of things around the world, especially in like emerging nations. Specifically for Google Cloud, we tend to lean more so on the tech side. And so we want to put resources in entrepreneurs and developers' hands so they don't have to pay for a rack of servers, or they don't have to pay for getting access to that expert who can help them connect their database to their to their front end. Like a lot of those things we offer through workshops, through credits, through doing events so they can meet other individuals, founders, investors. So, and when we target individuals who just don't come out of the accelerator or venture model, we go into organizations who have access to people in areas where we traditionally don't have large networks within. So we do a whole host of things to target not just the folks who graduated from MIT or Stanford, but also the individuals who are looking to build products and platforms for their communities.
Yeah, so at Techstars, I think the two major ways that we can empower minority and some more marginalized entrepreneurs are through our recruitment and selection processes, and then also through actually creating inclusive programming. To speak to the former, we've implemented systems, and this is something that I care about deeply, just sort of make sure that our selection processes are not benefiting any specific population. So we have blind reviews at the top. We then make sure that our actual committees and the people who are making choices are a diverse set of voices, and also that every single stakeholder in our program is ideally representative of the community. So it's not just the people who come through the door, it's the mentors as well. We have a lot of work to do. And And I think there's, always more you can be doing, but processes like that have ripple effects in that you're sort of preventing systems that benefit certain people. And then as far as our programming actually goes, I think a really good example of creating inclusive programming is the very first Techstars program that ran in Boulder. They called their weekly all hands meeting 10-10, because at 10 p.m. on Wednesday nights every week, they would meet and do a stand-up. And if you think about that just at the baseline, you're ruling out basically anyone that has children. They can't be there. Anyone that's commuting who can't afford to be in downtown Boulder, Denver, New York, wherever it might be. Tons of people. So small tweaks like that, consistent programming time, making sure that your office space is in a place where you can commute to from all parts of the city. That's super important. And again, just, being really intentional about the way that you're running a program to make sure that not only the people are there reflect the community, particularly in New York, but that you're setting them up to be able to give everyone equal access to the resources you're providing.
What I'd like to add is this is a question that I think a lot about, especially with the founders that we work with being in these kind of unusual places. And so a product that we're building in addition to working with accelerators is something called the Fluency Score, and it's like a FICO score for startups. So the thesis behind this is that if we're picking startups for accelerators or for funding based on pitch decks and a few coffee meetings and these short interactions, we're really looking for the pattern. We're looking for the proof that this person looks like successful founders that we've known in the past, and we've talked about that. That's been discussed in the panels this morning as well. But what if we started to actually use data to understand these companies from the very beginning, like from the first day? We could understand the risk in those companies, because startups are risk, and do it in a quantifiable way that kind of cuts through the ability for a founder to look like they are going to be successful. And that's going to be the long-term mission for the work that we're doing. Fortunately, we get to do that with founders in these different programs, but I think there's a real opportunity to solve that problem.
I'll just add quickly that at Republic, we're offering hard benefits. We have some big corporate sponsors coming up. We're going to pay the onboarding and legal costs for people who want to crowdfund, for founders who are women or people of color. But beyond just giving material benefits to lots of different people, I mean, the most important thing you can do is provide education at key community choke points, whether it's affinity groups, other networks in minority communities, and just go there and tell people what you can and can't do. And then once they're in the family, once they're in the portfolio, just be a resource for them on the same level that a leading Silicon Valley VC would help you down the line, give you an introduction, give you a network. We try to do the same thing.
Okay, other questions?
Hey everyone, I'm Victor. I work with Acton Capital, so we do cross-border acceleration and investments, and I also have a startup out of Soho. My question would just be with new options for raising, specifically crowdfunding. How would you say is the difference between your guys' investment thesis versus traditional VC, and what would you say makes it a startup successful in crowdfunding?
Sure. So at Republic, we don't actually have an investment thesis per se. The thesis is that let's open up companies in traditional venture to the crowd. Let's let the wisdom of the crowd, the desires, the interests of the people decide who gets capital, right? That's the underlying investment thesis. In terms of which companies do well, there are really two types of companies that do well in a crowd fund. One is a company that has a huge community. You will meet some founders who have a product that people are just bananas over, right? They love this shoe, they love this food item, they love this tech, or they love the founder themselves. And those people will put in money no matter the terms, no matter what's going on. If you have a community, that really works. The other type of company that does really well on crowdfunding is a product that just resonates with the average person, that sounds interesting, that sounds cool. We had actually a woman founder of this company called Indemnis. It was a drone. It was parachutes for drones, and it was just really cool, right? Like I have no exposure to that market. I don't know anything about drones. I watched this video. It was just awesome. The campaign just crushed it, right? So things that resonate and make sense with people are people who really have networks that they can activate.
So I actually wrote about her, and she's very cool. Besides being a woman, she's in Alaska. So one of the reasons that I wrote about her is I wanted geographic diversity, and I've never written about an entrepreneur from Alaska. And she specifically was told that she had no problem actually raising money from angel investors because there are a lot of rich people in Alaska. But in order for her to go to the next round, meaning venture, she had to prove that she could raise money outside of Alaska. And the quickest way to do that was on Republic. And when I wrote about her, it was just when the federal government was closed, and she was waiting for approval because it's a drone product, and she needed what's the agency? The navigation agency.
FAA?
Yeah, thank you. The FAA approval. So here was a startup who was very much affected by the government shutdown, and I got a lot of readership about this article.
That's amazing.
It was terrific. So I don't know, do we have enough time for another question, or out of time? Okay. So I want to thank my terrific panelists, and I hope you learned a lot of new ways to fund. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.